Hi there, everybody. Rabbi Leah here. Um, welcome to Thursday. Welcome to Thursday morning. I hope you're all having a great week. And I am looking at myself in this camera, and I cannot believe how long my hair is getting. I'm going to be able to pull it back into ponytails and up into top knots and all kinds of things before you know it. Today I'm wearing one of my favorite hats. It's probably showing up backwards, maybe not, but it says well-behaved women rarely make history. And I got this hat in Memphis at the MLK, Martin Luther King Museum, and what an incredible experience that was there. But anyway, I want to start this morning with a song because we are grateful to be here. Thank God the weather is gorgeous. We're able to get outside a little bit, and we're just happy to be alive and upright. It's always a good thing. So let's sing together. Moda ani lefanecha, melech chai v'kayam, שהחזרת בי נשמתי בכם לה, בכם לה, רבה אמונתך. Rabba emunatecha. And because we're going to continue our study this morning about on Pirkei Avot, I want to say our prayer for Torah study, because even though it isn't specifically the Torah that we're studying, it all emanates from the Torah. And so we do the blessing together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, our sovereign God, ruler of the universe, who has sanctified us by his commandments and commanded us to immerse ourselves in Torah. So I want to show you, first of all, a book, because this is one of the books that I mentioned at the very, very beginning of our study of Pirkei Avot. It is called, I mentioned 3 books to you. This was one of them. It is called Back to the Sources, Reading the Classic Jewish Texts. And it is the first complete modern guide to the great books of the Jewish tradition, what they are, and how to read them. Edited by Barry W. Holtz. Now, I got mine back in 1999, like May of 99, but the book was published in the 80s. And since we're talking about Torah, Mishnah, Talmud, and so on, not much has changed in those texts. This was 1984, there is a later edition. I would highly recommend that you not buy this for your Kindle, simply because it's the kind of thing that you may want to read little bits at a time and go back and read things, and it's a little harder to find on a Kindle when you're reading that way. This way you could take notes in the columns or in the margins, you can underline things and highlight things, and so on. And I actually think that God willing, really soon, when things are back to a little bit of normal, I will be able to maybe study portions of this book with you, because I think many Jews are familiar with the Torah, familiar with the word Tanakh, meaning the Hebrew Bible, and with some of the other important pieces of rabbinic literature like Talmud, Mishnah, the commentaries, the Tosefta, Shulchan Aruch, the Zohar, and so on. But it might be interesting for us to do some kind of a survey course that would allow us to go through and identify what these texts really are. And the reason I had brought this to your attention early on was because what we're studying, Pirkei Avot, is part of the Mishnah, one of the very first rabbinic texts. And it's going to give you some great insights. It's really written in a way that I read it before I went to rabbinical school, and I did not have a lot of background in Jewish text. So I guess what I'm saying is that it is, I think, a good resource for the layperson who wants to learn more. You don't have to be a rabbinic scholar to pick up this book and understand it, and certainly with some discussion that'll make it even easier for us. Okay, so let me take a sip of my coffee and we'll get started. It ain't Starbucks, but it'll work. Okay, so here we go. In this part of Pirkei Avot, we have been introduced to the Zugot, who are the twins. And so we have these rabbis that seem to be paired with each other. And we've just now gotten to the fifth pair, which is Hillel and Shammai, probably the most familiar pair of rabbis who are considered a twinsies or a pairing of them. Now, when we say Hillel said or Shammai said, we're not necessarily talking specifically about something that words that came out of Rabbi Hillel's mouth or words that came out of Rabbi Shammai's mouth. But what we're talking about is things that were said by the schools of these sages, by their disciples, and so on. Although some of the things that we read in the Mishnah and Talmud are certainly attributed directly to these rabbis. And we know that Hillel and Shammai were kind of different personalities. Hillel was this kind of loving, outgoing, positive, happy guy. At least that's what tradition teaches us. And Shammai, on the other hand, was more, very straight as an arrow, curmudgeon-y type. Poor guy, got a bad rap. But anyway, so they were the founders of these two great schools, the house of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, that really begin the new era in Jewish history. And they were around, Shammai was around during King Herod's rule, which was from 37 years before the Common Era until the year 4 of the Common Era. And Hillel was actually an immigrant from Babylonia. And as I mentioned, he was kind of known for his kindness and his love of fellow human beings. So, we read in this first Mishnah about them, Mishnah number 12 of chapter 1, that Hillel and Shammai received the oral tradition from them, the them being the pair that came before them. And Hillel used to say, be like the disciples of Aaron, loving peace and pursuing peace, loving mankind and drawing them. Oh, I skipped a page. Drawing them, well, to close to Torah. Here's the page, close to Torah. So Hillel was all about engagement, getting people engaged, involved. And I think if he were a rabbi of the modern day, he'd be doing a lot of outreach to non-Jewish communities and probably a lot of outreach to interfaith families. That was the kind of guy that he was. And there's, a legend about Aaron, and this is why we say that Rabbi Hillel said, be like Aaron, that two guys were quarreling. They were having this terrible argument and they couldn't settle it. And so Aaron went to one of them and said to him, your friend, the fellow with whom you fought, is just beside himself. He is crying. He is beating his breast. He is tearing his clothing. He feels absolutely terrible about this disagreement that you had. And I really wish you would go to him and make amends. And at the same time, Aaron went to the other guy and said, your friend is absolutely beside himself with sadness. He feels terrible about this argument that you've had. He loves you so much, and he really wants to make amends with you. And so it's kind of like when you have two friends that you think would be good for each other. You tell one of them that so and so really thinks you're cute and would like to meet you, and then you tell the same thing to the other one. So it's what we call therapeutic fibbing. You are telling a little bit of a white lie in order to get people to make amends. And Hillel was known to be very much like Aaron, Moses' brother, the high priest, who worked to act in a manner that would bring people together. So the next Mishnah, Mishnah number 13 of chapter 1, and remember, Mishnah is like a little subchapter, contains even more statements from Hillel. All of these statements are in Aramaic, which, even though most of the Mishnah is in Hebrew, and by the way, Mishnaic Hebrew is very easy to read if you're a Hebrew reader. I found it to be much like reading almost prayer book Hebrew or modern Hebrew. Of course, the vernacular is different, but it wasn't like it's not like reading Talmud, which has its own, its own. I can't even describe it. Its own language. It's like reading modern English versus Shakespeare versus Chaucer. It's almost like three different languages. Mishnaic Hebrew is pretty easy to read. So, but a lot of what Hillel had to say was in Aramaic, and they're kind of like these folksy, pithy, easy to remember little sayings. And the fact that they're in Aramaic may be indicative of the fact that um, that most of the common folk at the time of Hillel, in the very, very end of the century before the Common Era, and then moving into the early century of the Common Era, first century of the Common Era, that the language of the street, the lingua franca, the slang, was Aramaic. Because you're not going to write in a language that people don't understand, especially something where you're doing cutesy little sayings that you want people to read and understand. You're going to say them in a language that people are going to get. So we're going to read a lot more of Hillel's stuff throughout this particular Mishnah. And here's another thing he said. He also used to say, Hu haya omer. That is the Hebrew kind of catchphrase that introduces all of what these guys said. So, we have Rabbi so-and-so and Rabbi so-and-so, and they got the tradition from the two rabbis before them. And Hu haya omer, he used to say, one who makes his name great causes his name to be destroyed. One who does not add to his knowledge causes it to cease. One who does not study the Torah deserves death. Yikers. And one who makes unworthy use of the crown of learning shall away, meaning shall disintegrate or die. So in this section, it's kind of interesting because a lot of the sections we have, Hu haya omer, shlosha devarim. He used to say three things. In this case, we have Hillel. He's being a little bit more verbose, and he's saying four things. So it's four separate statements, but I think if you look at the four, and we could summarize them as if it was two things that he was saying. Number one, a person must always study, okay? But you're not supposed to use your study to puff yourself up and and have it be for your own grandeur. So, you could be a Torah scholar, but you don't want to walk around saying, I am such a Torah scholar. There ain't no Torah scholar like this Torah scholar, okay? The learning is for your own growth, your own education, your own adding to your own well-being and your own knowledge and wisdom, not so that you can show it off. Although some of the rabbis were a little bit show-offy, but that's a whole different subject. In any case, you're a person who tries to make a name for themselves, meaning, puff up your reputation. Hillel says you're eventually going to lose your good name. Similarly, one who seeks honor for themselves is going to have honor elude them. It's going to slip from your grip. And that statement is also taken as a warning to a person to avoid the attention of the ruling power. So you don't want to draw attention to yourself from the ruling power, because if you seek too much attention, it could come back to bite you in the tush. They may say, I don't know who this guy is. He's got all this wisdom. We need to keep an eye on him because he may be trouble. So, you don't want to draw too much attention to yourself, and you certainly don't want to draw that attention to yourself by the ruling power, who at the time was Rome. And so, we know that Jewish students were punished for studying. We know that they were tortured. We know that famous rabbis were tortured for having disciples and so on. So you got to be careful. Don't say that everything you do is great. Be really careful about how you talk about yourself, your talents, your wisdom, how perfect you are, how great you are, and how bad everybody else is, because it may not bode well for you in the end. So, trying to seek your own honor, guess what? Honor will elude you. People get really tired of people who are braggarts and show-offs and grandstanders and so on. That's Snickers. He agrees with me. Okay. So, we heard that lesson earlier, actually, when we were reading from Mishnah 10, Shemaiah and Abtalion, because Shemaiah said, hate acting like a superior and don't attempt to draw near to the ruling authority. You get too close to that ruling authority, and guess what? Someday they're not the ruling authority anymore, and you are out. You are out of favor, so be careful. So the lesson is, constantly seek to increase your knowledge. Never be satisfied with the learning that you already have or already have done. Later on, we're going to hear another Mishnah that says that, a person is rich when they're happy with what they have and what they've learned so far. So don't say, well, I've studied Pirkei Avot, and so, I'm satisfied. I mean, we can always enrich ourselves by going on and studying more. In Judaism, learning is a lifelong pursuit. It is not supposed to end at age 13 any more than any other learning is supposed to end at age 13. And I think I've talked about this before, the fact that sadly, so many people have concluded their Jewish learning with bar or bat mitzvah. And in the case of most of our residents at Seacrest, bar mitzvah, because women of a certain generation did not have bat mitzvahs. And so learning was really the purview of their brothers and their fathers and their male cousins and their uncles and so on, but not for the women themselves, which is why I'm wearing my well-behaved women rarely make history. And it's interesting that in the Talmud, there are a few rabbis' wives who are mentioned in the Talmud who are as brilliant as the men, and guess what? They are not well behaved. They are what one would call rabble rousers and really get attention through various means. But Hillel goes on to say that somebody who doesn't learn Torah deserves to die. And, you know, it's not a statement I think we're supposed to take literally. Like, you don't study Torah, well, you can just drop dead. I think really what it means is that we consider Torah to be an Eitz Chaim, a tree of life. And that when we learn Torah, we learn so much that enables us to live lives of meaning and integrity and worth and justice and morals, ethics, and so on, that without a lot of those things, perhaps it feels like we're not as alive as we could be. Now, that's not to say that somebody who doesn't study Torah can't have integrity and great ethics and morals and values and so on and so forth. It's just that the Torah, meaning not just the Torah, but all the Torah and the oral Torah as well, enables us to have a blueprint for a way in which to live our lives that brings value to life. So I don't think that, that this was any kind of a directive to a court to say that guy's not a Torah scholar, he needs to be executed. I think Hillel was really rather saying that, without the spirituality that we have of Torah, a person's life can be empty. And there is a commentator on this. And one of them studies that one who says that one who has not studied Torah is like a beast. For human beings were only created different from animals for them to learn and study Torah. Now, I'm not sure that's the only difference between humans and beasts, but it's one who fulfills only their base needs of food and sex has not truly differentiated himself from an animal. So although Hillel urges people to study Torah, he warns them not to make use of this Torah study for their own advancement. Studying Torah is what makes you a wonderful, worthy, ethical human being. It doesn't mean you get to skip to the front of the room. It doesn't mean that you get front row seats to the Chargers games. It doesn't mean any of that. All it means is that you are doing that which you need to do to bring beauty, meaning, and a moral compass to your life. I guess that's the best way to say it. One who does so, in other words, one who says, well, I study Torah, is not going to receive any reward for their Torah study. And in fact, in ancient times, it was forbidden for rabbis to take a salary or to receive any material benefit from their work as a rabbi. It was, it might sound impractical. I mean, you are a rabbi, and you are, most rabbis at that time were, they weren't leading services the way a traditional rabbi does today. They weren't making pastoral care visits. They were scholars of Torah, and they could answer questions and disputes and so on and so forth. Okay, guys, time to be quiet. Mommy's teaching Torah. Okay, so in other words, but they didn't draw a salary from it. They were not supposed to have any kind of, advance or profit or anything like that in mind for teaching, because that is considered to be a corruption of Torah. So, we have warnings about using Torah as a means to an end. Okay? Now, if we look at that in a modern context, it kind of doesn't make a lot of sense, because I can tell you that my professors at Hebrew Union College were paid a salary to teach Torah, codes, Talmud, Mishnah, commentaries, rabbinic literature, Mishnah, Midrash, you name it, and they didn't do it for free. And many of them also traveled, and they were scholars in residence for various congregations, and they were compensated. But in the days of the Mishnah, rabbis were held that role, but also had vocations. So, many of them were, as I think I mentioned, they were, shoemakers and blacksmiths and goldsmiths and farmers and so on and so forth. So being expert in Torah was just one thing that they did. And, we are kind of amazed that they were able to do that. And it seems a little bit, it seems interesting to us nowadays that a rabbi isn't compensated for the work that they do somehow in some way. And we don't have, second gigs that we do because we don't have time. So, okay. Now I'm going to conclude with what is probably one of Hillel's most famous statements. And I think you will all know this. I'm going to read it in the English today. And then when we get together again on Tuesday for our next session, I'm going to show you the Hebrew. And here is what, it's a very succinct message. And I think in my mind, it is one of the most memorable rabbinic sayings. He also used to say, Hu haya od omer, he also used to say, Im ein ani li mi li, if I am not for myself, who is for me? But if I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? So this first statement of Hillel's, it's not a statement that is like talking about selfishness. If I'm not for myself, who's going to be for me? I'm going to be self-centered. I'm going to be selfish. I'm only going to, I almost said shellfish, but I didn't mean shellfish. I meant selfish. But, he's making a statement that says that a person's character and qualities rest squarely on their own shoulders. If I don't make myself a human being living a worthy life, living a life of value and integrity and justice and morals and so on, who's going to? Who's going to do it? I have to be responsible for that. So when he says, if I'm not for myself, who's for me? He's not saying I'm number one, I better take care of myself in terms of a selfish way of looking at it, but I'm responsible for the kind of person that I am. A person must work in this world and acquire their own merits. No one can do it for you. You have to work on your own behalf. And then the second statement kind of balances out the first because it says, but if I'm only for myself, then what am I? If I'm this person that is a wonderful person and I live a good life and so on, but I don't share that with others and I don't serve as a moral exemplar, what good is it? So my responsibilities don't end with me. I don't only do for myself. I have to contribute to other people and I have to contribute to the world as well. And that is really the most important thing, because once I'm gone, nobody else is going to be affected unless I have shared myself in that way with people. And then finally, im ein achshav ematai, if not now, when? What are you going to do? Our futures are not certain. We don't know beyond this moment right now, here at this point in time, that we are living and breathing. We don't know what the future holds for us. And so we may not have time to carry out this teaching and having an effect on other people. So if not now, when? What are you waiting for? Tomorrow? The next day? An hour from now? Now is the moment to be kind. Now is the moment to be honest. Now is the moment not to gossip. Now is the moment to be generous and give tzedakah. Now, 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 now. All we have is these moments of now. With that, I have 4 seconds left. I'm going to say goodbye, lehitraot, and we won't have our Chai there with Rabbi Leah until next Tuesday morning, but we will have blessings Friday night. We'll have services Saturday morning. We'll have Havdalah Saturday night. So there's still lots. I miss you all. I'll be on campus to visit this week again. And for the time being, lehitraot. Bye bye.